Okay, this meeting is being recorded. Well, welcome everybody to the first ever annual general meeting of the RCDF. It's an annual opportunity for the community to get together, to reflect and think about where we're going in the future with such a huge array of different projects that just keep growing around fashion and decoloniality. I'm Sarah Cheang from the Royal College of Arts. I'm speaking from the UK this evening. And in this first introductory session, we're going to give a bit of background on the work and the origins of the RCDF and really think about our growth perhaps from a tiny little meeting in Rabat in Morocco, where I was very, very fortunate to have been, to the formation of a foundation that has many agendas and even has AGMs. So in the future, the AGM may look a bit different, but certainly this time, we're taking this opportunity to bring together some multi-centered conversations and discussions with a range of kinds of presentations, speakers, languages, which you can see from our program over the next few days. So I'm joined here in this first session by Jose, who's chair of our new Supervisory Board, Rolando, who's chair of our Advisory Board, and Angela, whose new title is Director of our Executive Board. And we're going to say a little bit more about these titles and what this all means. In the future also, this AGM will be the chance to present activities and financial year reports and all kinds of things that are about being a foundation. But since this is our first year, there are no actual reports that we're going to present yet. We do, however, want to take the opportunity to ask people to think about supporting our work. Many of you so generously gave donations when you signed up. There's a QR code here if anybody didn't make a donation and wants to, if anybody wants to ask us how to spread the word more widely to support our costs. The costs at the moment that we're thinking about are the basic costs in setting up a foundation, and we'll say more about why we've done that. And the cost of the amazing zine that's been created, which we're going to hear about as well later this evening. So I'm now going to hand over first of all to Angela, who's going to say a bit more about the history of the collective and why we are how we are today. Angela.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. And it's been such an amazing journey. I mean, you know, as you said, we started in 2012. I got a small budget. I believe it was 1,500 euros to put on an international conference. And well, it was, right? We were 10 people. It was called the Non-Western Fashion Conference. We had Toby Slade from Japan. We had you from the UK. We had, I believe, Sarah Fay from Canada. Anyway, it was an amazing first. It was basically supposed to be a first off, right? Or a one-off. It was never the intention to be here 10 years later. But anyway, I guess we just really connected. It was a small group of people who were really, really committed to disrupt the Eurocentricity in dominant contemporary fashion discourse and practice. And so, yeah, 1 year later, remember, I had a postdoc, I believe, at the London College of Fashion. And so one became two. And in the second edition, we created a steering committee. So all of a sudden I wasn't by myself anymore. We were a group of people. I asked all my heroes and they all said yes to join, which was absolutely amazing. And so again, one led to two and two led to three. And I think we had a series of 5. We went to Hong Kong, although I wasn't there because I was in labor having my first child. We went to Antwerp and yeah, and then I believe, Tokyo. But after a while, well, not after a while, but I don't believe in coincidences, but I came across an article by Rolando Vazquez and Walter Mignolo on decolonial aesthesis. And that really incredibly changed our perspective, and not only our perspective, but even our practice. I think it opened our eyes. It made us realize how an academic conference was absolutely not inclusive. Based on abstract submissions, peer reviewing, who gets to speak, who doesn't get to speak, all in English. So basically it challenged us in so many ways, on so many levels. Personally, I can say it challenged me on a very personal level as well. So we started to reinvent ourselves. So not only our name, but remember in 2019, we were invited by the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht, which is an art residency. So we were invited for a 3-month residency, which was absolutely amazing to be in a completely different environment. I got to meet Erica de Grey for the very first time, although I had been working with her for years. And that's where we put on the first conversations, really. It was the first time that we decided not to have paper presentations, but to all sit in a circle and just meet and talk. And in the context of that residency, we also invited students who did all sorts of interventions. So I think that was our first step in reinventing ourselves. And as that goes on a long journey, there's several steps to come. And so the second big step, I think, for us was the beginning of this year, that after 9 years of operating as an informal network without a formal structure, without any structural funding, sheerly based on volunteers, putting so much time and effort in all the work we did. I mean, we've published, we've done 2 edited volumes following our conferences. We did special issues of fashion magazine, of fashion journals. Anyway, so we decided it was about time. I'll just mute this person. To take the next step. And so the next step was to create a not-for-profit foundation registered in the Netherlands. And that has been an absolutely amazing opportunity to invite new people in our team. And as you said, you already introduced Jose Teunissen and Rolando Vazquez, who were straight away on board. I think that has been the biggest blessing ever since I started this initiative, is all my heroes that I've been reaching out to all accepted to join and to play their role and to help us, to support us, to guide us. And you are part now of the advisory board, and you've seen like there's 10 absolutely amazing people who joined the advisory board. So yeah, we've come to a point where I am definitely half anxious, half excited what the dynamic of a foundation is going to do to this informal structure, where the flip coin of never having any funding is that you have absolute freedom to choose the format, the people, the participants. So yeah, applying for funding will help us be more sustainable financially, hopefully, and to pay people for their amazing time, work, expertise. But on the other hand, yeah, we'll see what that does to the dynamics of the collective. It's always this struggle of fighting the system from within or from the outside, the borderland. So I'm very curious on how that will play out. But I guess most of all, what I really, really wanted to contribute is taking this opportunity to thank everybody, people who've been with us since the beginning. I've already mentioned a few, like Sandra, Sarah, Toby, Erica. The new generation, this whole event, the annual general meeting, could not have been without the amazing, amazing commitment and effort of what I call a new generation. So me, Medrado, Sonia, Pierre-Antoine, Lixuan, they've put so much time and energy in this, and even some of their own budgets. So that's why I really wanted to step up and try to raise some funds to at least cover their expenses. And again, I'm so very grateful for the whole community to support us for so long, over such a long period of time. And I'm so much looking forward to the coming 3 days. So thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, Angela. Sorry, I was distracted because I just had an idea to fund another zine, so I've just scribbled it down. I'll tell you later. I'm now going to pass to Jose to tell us a little bit more about herself and her role on the Supervisory Board.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Jose Teunissen. I'm the Dean of School of Design and Technology at the London College of Fashion for 6 years now. Before I worked in the Netherlands. And actually my role is really a supportive role. When Angela reached out to me, I would be interested to, supervise the organization and become chair of the Supervisory Board. I've been following the work for as long as you exist. It's amazing work. It's a really important conversation, and I can actually, it would be really helpful for the organization if there would be some, formal and legal structure, because that's the way we're making this collective able to apply for funding. And since Angela is based in the Netherlands, maybe for other reasons, the Netherlands is not that bad, as starting as the country where we, are based and where we start to apply and tap into different foundations. I think it's from the start. It won't be that easy because there's no foundation and no actually where the work that is being done fits directly into those foundations. But at the same time, I think the conversation and decolonial is much higher on the agenda than it was 10 years ago, and there might also be opportunities in Europe. So we are just took and especially it's Angela's work primarily to put a lot of effort in set up all the legal constructions, the bank account, and all kind of different legal rules that we need to be taken care of. And luckily we found also the right members in the Supervisory Board, somewhat with real understanding of legal constructions and supervisory boards and all the legal issues in the Netherlands. So that gives us a sort of confidence, a feeling that we are, we could be confident about the current structure. And I think it will take us some time, but I'm really happy, with the events as they are taking place right now. And also I think we are a Supervisory Board try to make sure that actually, it should be led by the organization itself and by Angela. And we are just there to, mirror the ideas and make sure things could take place, and that we slowly try to scale up by finding some money so that actually we will landing in a new stage where actually it will be where we are in a position where actually we can set events that are set up, people can be paid for it, and we can have some more things. There will be some more recognition also financially. So I'm really happy and glad that I can be of support and be part of this wonderful organization and all the very important work that has been done, and that is still also in the pipeline to enroll for the future. And I think for the moment that's probably all I need to say.
Thank you. Angela, there's just been a message in the chat about whether the recording of this session is going to be made available. Would you be able to quickly answer that, so that because it's someone who has to leave?
Yes. The idea is that we make this available on the website, on the Rcdf website, so that people who couldn't join us can still watch it after.
Thank you. Okay, I'm now going to pass to Rolando. We're really pleased that you're here. Ask you to say a little bit more about yourself and your role.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Angela. Well, I would like to invite those of you that feel comfortable to turn on their cameras so that at least we can see each other in these times of big distances and social separation. Well, I'm really happy to be here and especially to see this conversation on fashion and decoloniality flourishing through the years and reaching so many biographies and so many geographies as well. So it has been really something very beautiful to be witnessing and to be invited to be part of. Angela asked me to speak a little bit about the intersection between decoloniality and fashion, and that's what I will do in 5 minutes, more or less, or 5. I will try to stay within time. Well, of course, fashion is a crucial location for decoloniality because it is a place where the colonial difference is very tangibly articulated. So on the one hand, you have, well, I know in the collective, decoloniality has been discussed a lot, so I will not explain every term, but we understand society or the global society as structured through the modern colonial order. So there is a modernity side and the coloniality side of global processes or social processes. And fashion sits very clearly in that articulation. On the one hand, in its modernity, it has, of course, its temporality that is the claim to the now of fashion. Fashion is often a synonym of the now. Its claim to contemporaneity, this race towards the present and the future, to be in the now of the present or the contemporary and chasing the future, which is really the temporal construction of modernity. And fashion is like an embodiment of that, like modern fashion, Western fashion has been an expression of that. In its coloniality, fashion is also a place where we can witness the erasure of other worlds through exploitation, through extraction, through destitution, but also the erasure of other ways of dressing, of weaving, of remembering. So fashion is constructed through those erasures, through that coloniality that is sustaining its discourse of modernity, its novelty, its claim to the now. So that is how we see the articulation of the colonial difference, this system that enables modernity to claim for itself the place of the present and the world historical reality, while destituting other worlds of being in order to produce that artifice. And of course, fashion is very tangibly that. I mean, with my students that are not fashion students, they are often sociology students or students in the humanities or social sciences. I very often use the example of fashion as just to make them reflect how we are dressed and who is making our clothes and where the materials come from and how can we access all that labor, consume all that lifetime of earth and people with very little resources here in the global north. So how the logic of consumption is implicated in the colonial difference can very easily be seen through fashion. So fashion is, for me, a key site of interrogation of the modern colonial order. It is also, of course, a place where we can observe the constitution of the modern subject as a subject that is constituted in relation to ownership and representation. So the connection between ownership and representation is very strong in fashion. and the turning of the body itself into a site of representation, into an image. So this, that is very, let's say, very deeply for us, the logic of modern colonial aesthetics is this logic of controlling representation to control experience. So it's not just what is the discursive, the representation, but it's a representation that becomes the framework of experience. And in fashion, you have that image, that representation, turning the body itself and the experience of the body or embodiment into that form of representation. So where representation begins governing experience. This is one of the logics of modernity, instead of the relation. So representation begins to replace a relation. If we think what is really the relation that we are exercising through, let's say, normative fashion or global fashion, capitalist fashion, we are exercising relations of a lot of suffering and pain and exploitation. But that's not what we experience. What we experience is the image. And that is where the perversity of the system functions, the enjoyment of the suffering of others. And one of the leading questions in our work, that is the impossibility of an ethical life in a world in which our sense of self, or we could say the image of ourselves, is dependent on the suffering of others and on the destruction of Earth. So I think that is something that I think through this collective is being interrogated in relation to fashion. I'm already over my 5 minutes. I will take 2 more.
No, Rolando,
I think
you
I had
have
10.
lots of time because you had 10
Okay.
minutes. But everybody
Oh,
else
10
is
minutes.
so fast
Okay.
that you can take up. You can have another 10 minutes.
Okay, I will slow down a little bit.
Also, I'm really enjoying it, so please just continue.
Okay. So, well, this is what I was trying to explain very briefly, that it is a place in which we can immediately grasp the workings of aesthetics or the modern colonial order of aesthetics, where the power of representation becomes at once the field of experience. And actually, you are designing to represent something that will become an experience of the self. And so once this is kind of established, how fashion is this place of the colonial difference and the workings of the colonial difference, or what in one of my texts I call the vortex, this logic of the production of an artifice that controls the libidinal structures, that controls desire, that controls consumption, and the image of the self and the experience of the self. Whereas at the same time, it is dependent on the destruction of and the extraction of life from Earth and from others. So this intersection is very important. So for me, or I think for us, the collective, but also in the modern decoloniality conversations, the question is, what would it mean to decolonize fashion? If it is moving against fashion as representation and artifice, and also against fashion as extraction and the reproduction of the suffering of others and the extraction from Earth. So here I would like to use the beautiful term of Sandra Nissen on if we can think a politics of fashion as a politics of redress. So what does it mean to redress this coloniality and to undo that artifice that fashion has been producing? What would restitution, repair, healing would mean for a politics of fashion, for a decolonial politics of fashion? So a restitution that is not about only restituting material artifacts like the fashion collections in the global north, but that is also about aesthetic and epistemic restitution. what would it mean to practice a fashion in the mode of listening and not in the power of representation, of governing a discourse, of designing an identity for the self, for example. So for us, the colonial aesthesis, and in this sense, the colonial fashion should move in this transition from
Rolando, you are muted.
Okay, the music got muted and me too. Okay. Let me, okay, this was just the final thought on this movement or this turning, this transition from the logic of representation and owning that has been governing the emergence of Western fashion and its continued power, moving from the logic of representation and owning to a logic of reception and owing. How can we think fashion as reception and as owing, as offering? Could we imagine something like that? That would be my interrogation for the question of decolonizing fashion. Thank you very much. I think that is what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. And in that, a politics of relation, would you say?
Yes, of course, the logic of relationality is very important instead of the logic of mediation, you know, because fashion really produces that mediation in which the self gets constituted through consumption and creates an image that is pre-designed or that is a bricolage of these pre-designed elements that the self groups, you know, in its practice of consumption. But something that worries us a lot is how the relational has been replaced by the mediations. So whereas people that would dress in relational worlds, and this dress will be part of a meaningful relation with the elders, with the earth, with the vernacular, with the knowledge of the place or of their lives, the meaning of their lives in relation with others. Now all that has been substituted by mediations. So an example I use also in relation to food is that, okay, you can buy, let's say, the exact same Mexican dress or African dress, or in, let's say you can buy it in any shop with the same materials, the same techniques. But that dress has not at all the same meaning when it is the dress of your grandmother or of your community, right? Because one is a relation that constitutes you, and the other is consumption that is constituting you, the consumption of the other, for example. And so there is it's not the object itself, it is the relation that it is producing. And on the one side, I will call it a mediation because it's mediated through fashion, through this power of representation, of discourse and of capital. And the other is really mediated, not mediated, but through relations. It's produced through our relations. So it creates, and it might be the exact same dress in terms of materiality and design and form, you know, but it carries a complete different politics and a complete different ethics and meaning. And it is also constituting the subject differently as a relational subject or as an individual consumer that is seeking an identity, for example. So I think that for me it's so important to think about the movements and the ethics and the politics, and not so much about the object itself.
Thank you. Thank you, Rolando, for putting so beautifully so many of the things that we've all been striving to think about, talk about, and work with. And at this point, we'd like to open up to questions from the audience and interactions from anyone here on the tiles. And even if you don't have your camera on, you can put questions in the chat and comments. I'm sure on the one hand, we'd really like to know if you have any thoughts or comments for us about the setting up of this new foundation. On the other hand, I'd also really like to invite people to let us know how the work they do connects with some of the issues that we've just heard Rolando speaking about, from partly from quite a philosophical perspective, perhaps, if I may use that word, I can't see the list of participants, unfortunately, on my screen, so I don't really know who's out there, but I'm wondering if there are people who are coming from different kinds of practices who might like to comment on the resonances or the ways in which they're working with these ideas. So it's an open floor, and also please, anyone here on the tiles who's been introduced or hasn't been introduced, please do take this opportunity to share with us.
Angela,
hi. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure if I needed to put my hand up or if you could see that I was on the screen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rolando. Thank you so much, Sarah and Jose. It's really been an honor to be part of this journey with the Research Collective for Decoloniality.
Eric, you just froze for a moment there. I don't know if that was for everybody, but on my side, yeah. Would you like to say again? You were just introducing yourself.
Thank you. My internet, when the wind blows, my internet is a little unstable. So I'm really honored to be part of the collective, to be part of this journey of dialogue around means to fashion and what it means to think about fashion. And so much of what Rolando was saying is really at the core of a lot of the questions that we share in thinking about, you know, the way in which not only our work with each other as the research collective, but also the kinds of questions that we put out there, so that these kinds of can continue as a kind of ripple in extending the dialogues or extending and creating a kind of change. So I think there's so many useful concepts that I think Rolando raised. And I kept thinking what an important concept of relationality, but as a global kind of relationality that this kind of set of dialogues has allowed us to have. So I just wanted to say it's been really, really a fantastic opportunity to be part of a dialogue. So thank you so much.
It's windy in South Africa. Yeah, applause for you, yes. Would anybody else like to offer some thoughts, share their perspective? I'm happy to read out comments in the chat box, or just switch on your microphone and speak. It's great to hear people's voices.
Yeah, I think I'm happy if there's the chance to ask Rolando, like, so we are transforming not only into a foundation, but even in our activities, we're really trying to set up less activities, but recurrent, that hopefully as the Decolonial Summer School can really create a long-term community of voices, that, you know, we have our monthly conversations, our annual general meeting, and then we're working towards our biannual fashioning assembly. But what I always feel very hesitant or reluctant about is, and this is also something we talk about in the Decolonial Summer School, is how you come together in difference, but in a difference that is so unequal, where there's very strong dominant voices, I mean fashion voices in this case, and then very fragile and very, yeah, I think fragile is the right word, the voices. So I think that always remains the challenge, how we want to build coalitional relations globally or worldwide or whatever, but how to safeguard that through that coalitional building, that we don't achieve the opposite, as in then we all kind of like become one voice, whereas the aim is that plurality of voices. I mean, I was talking to Sarah, how it's so difficult to work collectively, right? I mean, it's the beauty and the challenge at the same time. And especially we know with fashion, especially fashion globalization, it's full of diversity and inclusivity, but in the end, it's all about assimilation. We all have to be the same. We all have to look the same. We all have to, whatever, dress the same. In this idea of a global fashion history, this is what we're trying to go against. But sometimes I'm hesitant if we're not actually doing more damage than.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Well, I think I can just speak from the experience of the summer school, of course, that will go into its 13th year, I think, this summer. And of course, it is a place where of coalition building across differences. But we have one thing in common, and is the decolonial, and that means that we are all engaged with undoing coloniality. So maybe something I often like to explain is that not all critique is a decolonial critique. For example, Western-centric critiques are very good, but they are a lot about self-reflexivity, a lot about deconstruction, and they are very good exercises, but they are not concerned with coloniality. They are not concerned with undoing the colonial difference. So decoloniality is primarily an ethical and a political project that is seeking justice and that is seeking to undo the colonial difference. So that should be a parameter to say, well, am I undoing the colonial difference or am I replicating it? And then I know if I'm doing something decolonial or not, right? Might be very critical, but it's not decolonial, right? And as I always say, all these great critical authors from the West that I like very much and I teach them are not decolonial because they are not concerned with the question of coloniality. They are not concerned with the colonial difference. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that, of course, decoloniality, what it has created is a space, let's say, yes, a space of conversation across differences, because what coloniality has done is to create a monoculture that attacked all differences, that attacked the pluriversality of worlds. So people all over the world have experienced coloniality, has experienced this imposition of a single model of the world. And that is what joins us, that we can talk across our experiences of coloniality. And of course, the responses are very different because there is no one response. The decolonial is not a project like communism, you know. All responses have to be place-based because they respond to local histories of coloniality. and of erasure, but then we can talk across differences because we are conjoined by that common objective of undoing coloniality, of healing, of working towards justice. So there is a common ethics and a politics with a wide variety of local histories, including the question of decolonizing Europe, of course. That has to do not with Europe having been conquered, but with a Europe becoming Eurocentric and committing so much violence because of its colonial history. So Europe and its institutions also need to decolonize, but in a very different way, of course, because they have been imperial, not because they have been colonial. So well, that is one thing that what we discovered through the summer school is how decoloniality functions as a connector that allows for coalitions across differences. And the other very important guide for us is, of course, Zapatista political thought from Chiapas in Mexico, and where they say that we are equal because we are different. So for us, the notion of equality is one that is constituted through difference, which is really the reverse of the notion of equality in Western political thought, that is based on the reduction of difference and the celebration of individuality, basically. So if we are equal because we are different, it means that that we need to actively produce that inclusivity. Inclusivity is not reaching equality as a homogeneous category. Inclusivity is enabling all those voices to be dignified, all those histories or those embodied experiences to have a place. But this also doesn't mean that everybody has the same place. And here the expression of Santos on the ecology of knowledges is very good, because in an ecology you have small and larger organisms, and they can coexist, and actually they nourish each other, but they are not the same size or the same shape, So I think the allowing difference is also allowing all sorts of differences to come to the fore, and tensions as well, of course. Now there is another thing that is important for us, and is that we don't seek validation through institutions. So that's the danger of being institutionalized and seeking funding, of course. But it depends how you use institutions, of course. You can always use also Santos saying you can use hegemonic means for counter-hegemonic purposes. But then you need to be very clear that those institutions are not your horizon, are not your objective, but they can be a tool for your objective. And that is okay. And so you are not sacrificing your ethics and your politics for the money, let's say it like that. And but then in this work, as you have seen in the summer school, we recognize a lot trajectories and experience. And so authority doesn't come through a hierarchy put on by institutions, like who has the title, who has the position. Authority in the decolonial comes by experience. Like the elders are so important for us. John Casimir, Maria Lugones, Walter Mignolo. They have walked so much more than us, and they have opened so many paths for us, created so many open conversations, vocabularies with which we are talking now. And that gives them an important authority for us that we recognize because of their trajectories, not because they have this or that title. So I think it's also important that that is not a fake horizontality where everybody is equal in terms of experience. Or no, some people have a lot of experience, have done a lot, have walked before us. And of course, this is a principle that is very common in indigenous and First Nations communities, where the elders are the most respected because they are the ones that carry the memory, that have opened the ways. And very unlike modernity, where it's people with titles, with power, and it's people with money, and the elders are in the end dismissed from society, you know, put into confinement institutions. That Foucault didn't wrote about those, but they are part of the confinement of the people with more experience and more age in our society. It's something terrible, I think, when we think through these experiences of other ways of being in the world. So, well, I'll stop there, but this is what your question brings to me.
That takes me to your answer takes me to so many places, including you know, the wounds that we all might be seeking to heal, some of them less obvious than others, and that go in so many places. I'm also encouraged by your remarks on institutions and their uses. I like to think quite often of repurposing institutions and what they offer, that, you know, a grant or an opportunity, there may be one set of aims, but maybe we can repurpose those aims. We can repurpose that gift so that, you know, we get where we need to be without too much too much conflict. Thank you. Sorry, did you?
No, I was thinking of the students that are doing thesis from PhD to bachelor thesis, and where I tell them, well, if the thesis is your life, then that's totally wrong. You know, you are done. When the thesis is an instrument for your life, that's okay. You know, but if you turn the thesis into your life, or it's like the institution into your life, then you stop existing. You know,
Yeah,
you just become in the terms of
yeah.
instead of that being a tool for joy and for your own life, you know.
No, the thesis is in your life. Your life isn't in the thesis. Yeah. Look, there's questions in the chat, and I'm going to. So Sonia asks a question in relation to this conversation about inclusivity and equalities. Sonia, did you want to ask your question, or should I read it out?
You can read it out. I think he's touched a bit upon it in what he just said.
Okay.
About allowing this process to take place. And I was just wondering, who's allowing it, or is that what we're essentially discussing tonight? Who's allowing the inclusivity, and who's allowing things to be done differently? The agency maybe is questioning.
Yeah, I wonder if Rolando can speak to this, but if anybody else wants to jump in with a response, or you know, anybody else has a sense of how that works in their own life or in their own working life.
Well, in our experiences, this is always going against the grain, so it has not been allowed by anybody. It has been struggled for. So people like Gloria Saldúa, like Maria Lugones, you know, they have been struggling to find a voice in a place that gave them no voice. And because of their struggle, all the student movements here in the Netherlands or in South Africa or in the UK that have been struggling to decolonize the university, I think they have been, they have not been allowed, but they have been resisting and pushing these questions. And so I think there is no one that can allow, but it has to be a politics of resistance. And of course, in the case of the decolonial coming from Latin America, this comes from social movements, from indigenous, Afro, Maroon, feminist movements that have been struggling against structures for 500 years. Speaking of the indigenous and Black movements, and this is also what for us leads us into very different responses than the post-colonial, for example, because for those movements, the struggle is not to access the system, is not to become modern or to be part of the state. For those movements, the struggles are for autonomy, to be able to live in their own way, because their own ways have been suppressed by coloniality. And that's why the decolonial speaks of delinking, which is very different than the post-colonial. and because we see that the horizon is not to be included in the system of oppression. The horizon is to delink from that system. So in that sense, there is nobody allowing. And this is, I mean, that's the spirit of Zapatistas as well, where they stop asking permission to the state to do their things, and they just did their autonomous society, and which is the largest autonomous society in the world. And the summer school is inspired in that. We didn't ask for permission to do the summer school. We just started doing it. And always using institutions for that, but the institutions never were the objective of the summer school. So yes, I think this is, so the who allows, the who validates are very important questions for us to see if we are really dreaming our own dreams, or if we keep on dreaming the dreams of those that are oppressing or controlling the imagination.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got my eye on the clock, and there's some great comments and thoughts appearing in the chat, and a bit of a kind of a discussion going on there, which is really nice to see. And as we only have 5 minutes left in this session, I'm actually going to go to a great question that came in earlier from Siviwe. He says they're too shy to ask the question themselves. So I take that as permission to speak the words. So I'm going to just read the question out. You speak about decolonial listening as the humbling of modernity. Would you say that if we have to use the everyday stroke mundane as tools stroke spaces to listen through, that we would hear in a more humbled way or a more authentic perspective?
Well, I'm not sure I gathered the whole question, but of course, so the humbling of modernity, and also the methodologies of humbling that have to do with also methodologies of positionality are like, so what are the conditions for listening? Because listening is not just something we can do, because we have been trained to just speak and consume and to hear, let's say. So listening as a politics of reception requires the humbling of our frameworks of understanding and the positioning of the self, to recognize that we are located somewhere. So the university is very violent, for example, because it puts us nowhere. It puts us in the third person. It rejects us from thinking, where are we, and from recognizing our privileges and how we are implicated in the sufferings that we're so worried about. So humbling has to do with abandoning that false innocence of not being implicated, and to recognize that we are part of, that we are crossed by the colonial difference, and that we are complicit with it as well. So when we uncover our place in relation to the colonial difference, so not just as my identity, like how I define myself, but my place historically, socially in the colonial difference that is constituting all my privileges, for example, that is a condition to start listening, because then you can begin listening to the difference of the other when you know who you are and where you are thinking from. So we all have something to say and to do, but as long as we know who we are, where are we standing, what constitutes us. And so unlike the postmodern, let's say the most common interpretation of the postmodern discourses, that we become, we abandon the meta-narratives of modernity, the universalities, the fixed normativities, and we become hybrid, and we become performative subjects. The decolonial works out a very different exit to that. So we also criticize the universalities and the normativities of the modern system, but our exit is not to become hybrid and to enter that privilege of performativities, etc., and that bricolage of identities and messiness and all of that. Our response is we abandon the fakeness of universalities to position ourselves, to locate ourselves. And from that location, from that positioning, we can start relating to each other. We can start listening. So if you want to, in a more abstract way, listening requires the silencing of the self, of that artificial self that we have been constructing through the institutions of modernity. So how we silence it and humble it to recognize that we actually need the relation to others to have meaning and to enable that politics of ethics and justice that we want to enact, that we cannot do it on our own, and that we should renounce that position of abstraction, of being nowhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But then there's another question here about how we enable that humility of self to be able to occur, isn't there? Which I think is another part of the question that's being asked. And you know what? Ironically, we're talking about humble listening, and I'm going to say that we're out of time and we can't listen anymore unless Angela wants to give us, like director of Rcdf, permission to continue. I do know that we need to respect everyone's time as well. So, Angela, do you want to make a pronouncement?
It's a collective decision, Sarah.
maybe just to recommend. Maybe just to, I mean, in the essay Vistas of Modernity, there is a little section on the pedagogies, which are very concrete steps on how to go about pedagogies of humbling, of relationality and transition, and that I practice in the classroom, for example. And so it's not something just very abstract and impossible. It's something we can actually do.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you. I apologies to Li Xuan, Karishma and Esther that we didn't get to your comments and questions, but thank you very much, and they are there in the chat for people to see. Thanks to everybody who's spoken here. We now take a break, do we not? And then we're over into the next session. Angela, do you want to just say 2 words about the next session so people can orientate themselves?
I mean, yeah, the idea is to have, I think, a 10-minute break, and then we will have a new host, or a new moderator, sorry, and a new group of guests who will be launching the very, very, very first RCDF zine ever made. And I can only say I saw it today and I was completely blown away. This was supposed to be a newsletter and it became an absolutely amazing zine. So I absolutely invite everybody to join and to discover the zine by the collective from Brazil. So back in 10. Thank you so much, Rolando, always for sharing your wisdom, helping us on our journey. So thank you very much, Rolando. Thank you, Jose, for being here, for accepting again to help us, help me, help the collective. Thank you very much. So see you in 10 minutes.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Do we stay on the call? It's the same Zoom link?
Same. We
Right.
just stay here.
We just turn our cameras off and take a quick break. Okay.